Adrian Carter was a man who had everything: money, power, and influence. His name was known across industries, his face plastered on magazine covers, and his bank account numbers so large they seemed almost unreal. But behind the polished exterior of this billionaire's life lay a deep emptiness, one that no amount of wealth could fill. For 5 long years, Adrian had been carrying a burden too heavy for anyone to bear: the loss of his only daughter. Emily wasn't just his child. She was his entire world. From the moment she was born, she brought light into his otherwise busy and stressful life. Her laughter was like music, her curiosity endless, and her creativity unmatched. One of her quirkiest habits was drawing little doodles on napkins during family dinners. At first, Adrian thought it was just a phase, but soon those tiny drawings became something special between them. They would sit together at the dining table, sharing stories while Emily sketched away. Sometimes it was stick figures holding hands under a heart-shaped sun. Other times it was random shapes or patterns that made no sense to anyone else but meant everything to her. But then came the day that changed Adrian's life forever. A tragic car accident took Emily away from him. In an instant, all the joy, warmth, and meaning in his life vanished. Guilt consumed him because he knew he hadn't spent enough time with her when she was alive. Work always came first. Meetings, deals, deadlines. They were priorities over bedtime stories and weekend picnics. Now all he had left were regrets and memories stored in photo albums and old napkins tucked inside drawers. Every night, Adrian returned to his penthouse overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but it offered no comfort. His home felt more like a museum than a living space, filled with expensive furniture and artifacts collected over decades. Everything screamed luxury, yet nothing felt real. He tried distracting himself with work, throwing himself into projects and acquisitions, but even that couldn't numb the pain. No matter how hard he worked, the silence in his apartment reminded him of what he'd lost. One evening, feeling restless and suffocated by the weight of his loneliness, Adrian decided to step out. Not for business meetings or charity events, he did those often enough, but for something different, something simple. On a whim, he grabbed his coat and walked out into the chilly night air. He wandered aimlessly through the streets until he found himself standing outside a small diner tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The neon sign flickered faintly, reading Joe's Diner in faded red letters. It wasn't fancy or glamorous, but there was something inviting about it. Maybe it was the warm glow spilling out onto the sidewalk or the smell of coffee wafting through the door. Whatever it was, Adrian felt drawn to it. Pushing open the glass door, he stepped inside. The atmosphere was cozy, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal environments he usually inhabited. Booths lined the walls, each occupied by people chatting casually. Waitresses moved around with plates of food, their uniforms slightly wrinkled but clean. There was a hum of conversation mixed with the clinking of cutlery against plates. It was ordinary, unpolished, and utterly refreshing. Adrian slid into a booth near the back, trying to blend in as much as someone wearing a tailored suit could. He ordered a black coffee, not because he particularly wanted it, but because it gave him a reason to stay. As he waited, his eyes wandered around the room. That's when he noticed her, the waitress serving nearby tables. She looked young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, though. It was what she was doing between taking orders. She kept scribbling on napkins. At first glance, it seemed harmless, a bored employee passing the time. But as Adrian watched closely, his breath hitched. There it was, a doodle identical to the ones Emily used to make. A stick figure holding hands beneath a heart-shaped sun. It wasn't just similar, it was exactly the same. Every line, every curve. It was as if Emily herself had drawn it. His heart pounded in his chest. How could this be possible? Was it mere coincidence, or was there something deeper at play here? Unable to tear his gaze away, Adrian stared at the waitress, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why was she drawing the same thing Emily used to create? And most importantly, could she somehow be connected to his daughter? For the first time in years, Adrian felt something other than sadness. Curiosity burned within him, urging him to find out more. Little did he know, this chance encounter would lead him down a path he never expected, one that would force him to confront his past, rediscover his humanity, and perhaps find a glimmer of hope in the darkest corners of his soul. Adrian Carter was a man who had everything: money, power, and influence. His name was known across industries, his face plastered on magazine covers, and his bank account numbers so large they seemed almost unreal. But behind the polished exterior of this billionaire's life lay a deep emptiness, one that no amount of wealth could fill. For 5 long years, Adrian had been carrying a burden too heavy for anyone to bear: the loss of his only daughter. Emily wasn't just his child. She was his entire world. From the moment she was born, she brought light into his otherwise busy and stressful life. Her laughter was like music, her curiosity endless, and her creativity unmatched. One of her quirkiest habits was drawing little doodles on napkins during family dinners. At first, Adrian thought it was just a phase, but soon those tiny drawings became something special between them. They would sit together at the dining table, sharing stories while Emily sketched away. Sometimes it was stick figures holding hands under a heart-shaped sun. Other times it was random shapes or patterns that made no sense to anyone else but meant everything to her. But then came the day that changed Adrian's life forever. A tragic car accident took Emily away from him. In an instant, all the joy, warmth, and meaning in his life vanished. Guilt consumed him because he knew he hadn't spent enough time with her when she was alive. Work always came first. Meetings, deals, deadlines. They were priorities over bedtime stories and weekend picnics. Now all he had left were regrets and memories stored in photo albums and old napkins tucked inside drawers. Every night, Adrian returned to his penthouse overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but it offered no comfort. His home felt more like a museum than a living space, filled with expensive furniture and artifacts collected over decades. Everything screamed luxury, yet nothing felt real. He tried distracting himself with work, throwing himself into projects and acquisitions, but even that couldn't numb the pain. No matter how hard he worked, the silence in his apartment reminded him of what he'd lost. One evening, feeling restless and suffocated by the weight of his loneliness, Adrian decided to step out. Not for business meetings or charity events, he did those often enough, but for something different, something simple. On a whim, he grabbed his coat and walked out into the chilly night air. He wandered aimlessly through the streets until he found himself standing outside a small diner tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The neon sign flickered faintly, reading Joe's Diner in faded red letters. It wasn't fancy or glamorous, but there was something inviting about it. Maybe it was the warm glow spilling out onto the sidewalk or the smell of coffee wafting through the door. Whatever it was, Adrian felt drawn to it. Pushing open the glass door, he stepped inside. The atmosphere was cozy, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal environments he usually inhabited. Booths lined the walls, each occupied by people chatting casually. Waitresses moved around with plates of food, their uniforms slightly wrinkled but clean. There was a hum of conversation mixed with the clinking of cutlery against plates. It was ordinary, unpolished, and utterly refreshing. Adrian slid into a booth near the back, trying to blend in as much as someone wearing a tailored suit could. He ordered a black coffee, not because he particularly wanted it, but because it gave him a reason to stay. As he waited, his eyes wandered around the room. That's when he noticed her, the waitress serving nearby tables. She looked young, probably, in her early 20s with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, though. It was what she was doing between taking orders. She kept scribbling on napkins. At first glance, it seemed harmless, a bored employee passing the time. But as Adrian watched closely, his breath hitched. There it was, a doodle identical to the ones Emily used to make. A stick figure holding hands beneath a heart-shaped sun. It wasn't just similar, it was exactly the same. Every line, every curve. It was as if Emily herself had drawn it. His heart pounded in his chest. How could this be possible? Was it mere coincidence, or was there something deeper at play here? Unable to tear his gaze away, Adrian stared at the waitress, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why was she drawing the same thing Emily used to create? And most importantly, could she somehow be connected to his daughter? For the first time in years, Adrian felt something other than sadness. Curiosity burned within him, urging him to find out more. Little did he know, this chance encounter would lead him down a path he never expected, one that would force him to confront his past, rediscover his humanity, and perhaps find a glimmer of hope in the darkest corners of his soul. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something monumental. Each visit to the diner brought him closer to unraveling the mystery, but it also stirred up emotions he thought he'd buried years ago. The waitress, Lila, as her name tag read, was becoming more than just a curiosity. She was a doorway into memories Adrian had tried so hard to lock away. Every time she spoke about her friend, every time she drew one of those familiar doodles, he felt like he was piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had been scattered for far too long. One evening, after weeks of casual conversations and stolen glances, Adrian decided it was time to dig deeper. He didn't want to scare her off or make her uncomfortable, but he needed answers. Sitting in his usual booth, he waited until the diner slowed down a bit before flagging her over. When she approached, balancing an empty tray against her hip, he smiled warmly. "Hey, do you have a minute?" he asked, his tone light but tinged with urgency. Lila raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Sure," she said, setting the tray aside and sliding into the seat across from him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the hum of the diner fading into the background. Adrian realized this was the first time they'd sat face to face without the distraction of orders or refills. It felt intimate, almost sacred. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Adrian began, choosing his words carefully. "About your friend, the one who inspired your drawings. You mentioned she passed away in a car accident?" Lila nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Yeah, it was a long time ago now. I was young, but losing her hit me hard. She wasn't just my best friend, she was family." Adrian swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He wanted to blurt out everything, that he believed this friend might be his daughter Emily, but he held back. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was her name?" For a split second, Lila hesitated, as if weighing whether she should share such personal details with a stranger. But there was something genuine about Adrian's demeanor, something vulnerable yet steady. Finally, she sighed and said, "Emily. Her name was Emily." The room seemed to tilt around Adrian. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. Hearing that name aloud, spoken by someone else, was both beautiful and excruciating. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself before looking at Lila again. "Emily," he repeated softly, testing the weight of the word. "Tell me more about her." Lila smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She was special. Like, really special. We grew up together, practically inseparable. She had this way of making everything feel okay, even when life got messy. Remember what I told you about puddles being magic portals? That was all her. She could turn anything into an adventure, a walk to the park, a rainy day, even washing dishes. Adrian listened intently, nodding along. Everything she described matched Emily perfectly. The creativity, the boundless energy, the ability to find joy in the smallest things. It was like hearing a eulogy for his daughter, except it came from someone who truly understood her spirit. "And the drawings?" Adrian prompted gently. "You said you two used to draw together." Lila laughed softly, pulling out another napkin. "Oh yeah, she loved drawing," said it helped her think. "Sometimes we'd sit for hours just sketching whatever came to mind. Those stick figures holding hands under the heart-shaped sun. That was totally her thing. She called it our symbol. Kind of cheesy, but it stuck." Adrian's vision blurred as tears welled up in his eyes. He blinked them away quickly, not wanting Lila to see him cry. "Our symbol," he echoed. his voice cracking slightly. That's exactly what she used to call it. Lila tilted her head, studying him closely. Wait a second, she said slowly, narrowing her eyes. How do you know that? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Adrian knew he couldn't keep dodging the truth anymore. This moment had been building since the day he walked into the diner, and now it was here, unavoidable. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photograph. It was worn at the edges, faded from years of handling, but the image was clear enough. Emily, smiling brightly, sitting at their dining table with a napkin covered in doodles spread out in front of her. He slid the photo across the table toward Lila. This is Emily, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter. Lila stared at the picture, her hand trembling as she picked it up. Her eyes widened in recognition, and then, just like that, the dam broke. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the photo to her chest. It's her, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's really her. Adrian nodded, tears streaming down his own face. I never knew she had a friend like you, he admitted, his voice barely audible. She never told me about you. Lila shook her head, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. We lost touch after she moved away. We wrote letters for a while, but then the accident happened. Her voice trailed off, choked with grief. I didn't even know where she went or why. All I had left were the memories. And those drawings. They sat there for a long time, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Neither of them spoke. Words weren't necessary. In that moment, they shared something profound. A bond forged through loss, love, and the indelible mark Emily had left on both their lives. Eventually, Lila cleared her throat and looked up at Adrian. You must miss her so much, she said softly. Adrian nodded, his jaw clenched tight as he fought to hold back another wave of tears. Every single day, he confessed. But talking to you, hearing about her from someone who loved her, as much as I did, it makes me feel like I'm getting a piece of her back. Lila smiled through her tears, reaching across the table to place a gentle hand on his. She talked about you, you know, not often, but when she did, it was always with so much pride. She said you worked hard because you wanted to give her the best life possible. She admired that about you. Adrian's chest tightened. Pride wasn't something he associated with his role as a father, especially after Emily's death. Guilt had consumed him for years, overshadowing any positive memories. But hearing this, from someone who knew Emily intimately, made him realize maybe he hadn't failed her entirely. As the night wore on, they continued talking, sharing stories about Emily. Adrian learned things he never knew before. How she taught Lila how to ride a bike, how they built a treehouse in her backyard, how she dreamed of traveling the world someday. Each story painted a fuller picture of his daughter, one he hadn't seen in years. And through it all, Lila reminded him that Emily's legacy lived on, not just in memories, but in the connections she created and the lives she touched. By the time Adrian left the diner that night, he felt lighter somehow. The ache of losing Emily would never fully disappear, but meeting Lila gave him a sense of closure he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he could honor Emily's memory without being weighed down by guilt and regret. The days turned into weeks, and Adrian found himself visiting the diner more often than he ever imagined he would. What started as a chance encounter had blossomed into something deeper, a connection that neither of them had anticipated. Lila wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a bridge to memories Adrian thought he'd lost forever. Through her stories, he began to see Emily in a new light, not just as his daughter, but as a vibrant, independent person who had touched lives beyond his own. Each visit brought fresh revelations. One evening, as they sat in their usual booth, Lila pulled out an old shoebox from under the counter. I've been meaning to show you this, she said, placing it gently on the table between them. The box was worn, its edges frayed from years of use. Adrian's heart raced as she opened it, revealing a treasure trove of letters, photographs, and trinkets. "These are all from Emily," Lila explained, her voice soft with nostalgia. She picked up a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. "We used to write letters to each other after she moved away. I kept every single one." Adrian unfolded the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was unmistakably Emily's, neat yet playful with little doodles decorating the margins. As he read the words, his throat tightened. It was filled with updates about her new school, jokes about teachers, and promises to visit soon. But what struck him most was the affectionate tone. She signed off with, "Love you always, Em." He looked up at Lila, his eyes glistening. "You saved all of these?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lila nodded, smiling faintly. "Of course. They meant everything to me. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Reading them made me feel like she was still here, you know?" Adrian felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so many years consumed by guilt and regret, believing he hadn't done enough for Emily. Yet here was Lila, someone who cherished every moment they shared, holding on to memories with such care and reverence. It was humbling and heartbreaking all at once. Over time, their conversations grew more personal. Adrian opened up about his struggles as a father, admitting how work had consumed him during Emily's childhood. "I was always chasing the next deal, the next success," he confessed one night, staring into his coffee cup. "I told myself it was for her future, but now I realize I missed so much of her present." Lila listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed a hand over his. "You can't change the past," she said gently, "but you can honor her memory by living the way she would have wanted you to. Don't let guilt take away the joy she brought into your life." Her words hit home. Adrian realized he had been punishing himself for years, allowing grief to overshadow the love he still carried for Emily. Talking to Lila helped him see that his daughter wouldn't want him to live like this. She would want him to remember the good times, the laughter, the adventures, and to keep moving forward. One day, Lila surprised him by bringing out a sketch pad. Unlike the napkins she usually drew on, this one was filled with intricate designs and colorful illustrations. "This is my tribute to Emily," she explained, flipping through the pages. Each drawing was inspired by their shared memories. A treehouse surrounded by wildflowers, two figures dancing in the rain, a sun rising above a hillside. At the center of every piece was the familiar symbol, the stick figures holding hands beneath a heart-shaped sun. "I started working on these after she passed," Lila admitted, her voice tinged with both sadness and pride. "It's my way of keeping her alive in my art, in my heart." Adrian was speechless. The sketches were breathtaking, capturing Emily's spirit in a way words never could. He flipped through the pages slowly, taking in every detail. "These are incredible," he finally managed to say. "You're incredibly talented." Lila blushed, brushing off the compliment. "Thanks, but it's not about talent. It's about remembering her and honoring the bond we had." Inspired by her dedication, Adrian decided to do something he hadn't considered in years. He began revisiting Emily's old belongings. For so long, he had avoided opening the boxes stored in his attic, afraid of confronting the pain. But now, encouraged by Lila, he felt ready. Together, they spent an afternoon sorting through photo albums, journals, and mementos. Each item sparked a new story, a new memory. They laughed over silly pictures of Emily dressed up for Halloween, marveled at her early attempts at poetry, and reminisced about family vacations. Through it all, Adrian noticed something remarkable. Lila didn't just share his grief, she amplified his joy. Her presence reminded him that while loss was inevitable, love endured. With her help, he began to heal, not by forgetting Emily, but by celebrating her life. As their friendship deepened, Adrian found himself wanting to support Lila in return. He learned that she had dreams of becoming an artist, but had put them on hold due to financial constraints. Without hesitation, he offered to fund her education, insisting it was the least he could do. "Emily would want you to follow your passion," he told her firmly when she hesitated. "Let me help you make that happen." At first, Lila resisted, not wanting to impose, but eventually she accepted, overwhelmed by his generosity. In gratitude, she promised to create a special project dedicated to Emily, a collection of artwork, inspired by their shared memories. "It'll be my way of saying thank you," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "And it'll be a tribute to her legacy." Their partnership became a turning point for both of them. Adrian, who had spent years isolated in his penthouse, rediscovered the beauty of human connection. Lila, who had struggled to find direction after Emily's passing, found purpose in channeling her grief into art. Together, they proved that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there was room for hope, healing, and renewal. By the time winter rolled around, the diner had become more than just a place where Adrian sought solace. It was a sanctuary, a space where two broken souls had come together to rebuild themselves, piece by piece. And though neither of them could ever replace what they had lost, they had found something equally precious, a second chance at life, guided by the enduring spirit of the girl who had brought them together. As winter gave way to spring, Adrian and Lila's bond continued to grow stronger. What had started as a chance meeting in a small diner had transformed into a partnership rooted in shared grief, healing, and mutual respect. For Adrian, Lila became more than just a link to Emily's past. She became a source of inspiration, a reminder that life could still hold meaning even after unimaginable loss. And for Lila, Adrian offered not only support but also validation of the memories she held so dear. One crisp morning, as sunlight streamed through the diner windows, Lila approached Adrian with an idea that had been brewing in her mind for weeks. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice tinged with excitement. "What if we did something bigger? Something that honors Emily's memory and brings people together?" Adrian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like what?" Lila hesitated, for a moment gathering her thoughts before continuing. "An art exhibition, a showcase of my work, pieces inspired by Emily. But it wouldn't just be about me. It could include stories from others who knew her, maybe even some of her own drawings or writings. We could call it Sunshine Hearts." The name sent a shiver down Adrian's spine. It was perfect, simple yet profound, capturing the essence of Emily's spirit. He nodded slowly, his eyes lighting up with admiration. "That's a beautiful idea," he said softly. "But are you sure? You're ready for something like this? Exhibitions take a lot of planning and effort." Lila smiled, her determination unwavering. "I know it won't be easy, but I want to do it for her. And besides, I'm not alone anymore, right? You'll help me." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, Adrian had felt powerless against the weight of his guilt and sorrow. But now, standing beside Lila, he realized he had a role to play. Not just as Emily's father, but as someone who could ensure her legacy lived on. "Of course I'll help," he replied firmly. "We'll make it happen together." Over the next few months, their lives revolved around preparing for the exhibition. Lila poured her heart into creating new pieces, each one infused with fragments of Emily's personality. There were paintings of sunsets they used to watch together, sketches of the treehouse where they spent countless afternoons, and collages made from old photographs and letters. Every artwork told a story, weaving together moments of joy, laughter, and love. Meanwhile, Adrian threw himself into organizing the logistics. He rented out a local gallery, hired a team to handle setup, and reached out to friends and acquaintances who had known Emily. Slowly but surely, the event began to take shape. Flyers went up around town, social media buzzed with anticipation, and word spread about the upcoming tribute to a girl whose light had touched so many lives. Throughout the process, Adrian and Lila worked side by side, their collaboration seamless and natural. Late nights at the gallery turned into impromptu brainstorming sessions where they bounced ideas off each other and laughed over shared memories. During quieter moments, they reflected on how far they'd come since that fateful day in the diner. Neither of them had expected their paths to cross, let alone intertwine so deeply, yet here they were, united by a common purpose, to celebrate Emily's life and keep her memory alive. As opening night approached, nerves began to set in. Lila worried whether people would understand the depth of emotion behind her work, while Adrian fretted over whether he'd done enough to honor his daughter. On the evening of the exhibition, both arrived at the gallery early, pacing nervously as staff put finishing touches on displays and arranged refreshments. Finally, the doors opened, and guests began streaming in. Friends, family members, former classmates, and even strangers filled the space, drawn by curiosity and a desire to pay tribute. The walls were adorned with Lila's vibrant creations, each piece accompanied by a short description explaining its significance. In one corner, a projector displayed slideshows of Emily's childhood photos, set to soft instrumental music. Another area featured a guest book where attendees could write messages or share their own memories of her. Adrian stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and thanking them for coming. As he watched people interact with the exhibit, he noticed something remarkable. Everyone seemed connected, not just to Emily, but to each other. Strangers exchanged stories, laughed over shared experiences, and comforted one another in moments of sadness. The room buzzed with energy, a testament to the impact Emily had made during her short life. At one point, Lila stepped onto a small stage at the center of the gallery to deliver a speech. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice rang clear and steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, scanning the crowd. "This exhibition is more than just an art show. It's a celebration of someone who meant the world to so many of us. Emily wasn't just my best friend, she was a force of nature, a beacon of kindness, creativity, and love." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "When she passed away, I thought I'd lost a part of myself forever. But then I met Adrian. And together, we discovered that Emily's spirit lives on, in our memories, in our actions, and in the connections we forge with others. This exhibition is for her, but it's also for all of us, because even though she's gone, her legacy continues to shine brightly." By the time Lila finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Applause erupted, heartfelt and thunderous, echoing through the gallery. Adrian stepped forward to join her on stage, his eyes glistening with tears. "I don't have much to add," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly, "except to say thank you to Lila for reminding me how extraordinary my daughter truly was, and to all of you for keeping her memory alive. She may no longer be with us physically, but tonight proves that her impact endures." The evening unfolded beautifully, with guests lingering long after the formal program ended. They admired the artwork, shared stories, and marveled at how Emily's influence extended far beyond her immediate circle. For Adrian, seeing so many people come together in her honor was both humbling and uplifting. It reinforced the belief that love transcended loss, that even in death relationships could continue to evolve and inspire. As the night drew to a close, Adrian found himself standing beside Lila once again, gazing at the final display. It was a large mural depicting two figures holding hands beneath a heart-shaped sun, the symbol Emily had created and cherished. Beneath it, engraved in bold letters, were the words, "Love lives on." "You did it," Adrian said quietly, turning to Lila with a proud smile. "This is exactly what she would have wanted." Lila shook her head, her own smile radiant despite the tears streaking her cheeks. "Not just me. Us. We did it together." In that moment, surrounded by warmth and connection, Adrian felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of losing Emily would always remain, but it no longer defined him. Instead, he chose to focus on the beauty of what she had left behind, the friendships she fostered, the creativity she inspired, and the love she shared freely with those lucky enough to know her. And as he looked around the room, filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt conversations, Adrian realized something else. Emily hadn't just brought him and Lila together. She had reminded them both of the power of human connection, the ability to heal, to grow, and to find light even in the darkest corners of life. The success of the exhibition didn't just mark a turning point for Adrian and Lila. It sparked a ripple effect that touched countless lives. What began as a tribute to Emily evolved into something much larger, a movement celebrating the power of love, memory, and human connection. The impact was felt not only by those who attended but also by strangers who stumbled upon photos, videos, or stories shared online. For Adrian, it became clear that Emily's legacy wasn't confined to a single event. It had the potential to inspire change on a broader scale. In the weeks following the exhibition, Adrian found himself reflecting on how far he'd come since that lonely night when he first walked into the diner. Back then, he was a man weighed down by guilt and regret, unable to see beyond his own pain. But now, thanks to Lila and the community they'd built around Emily's memory, he felt lighter, freer. He realized that while he could never bring her back, he could honor her life by continuing to spread the same kindness, creativity, and joy she embodied. One day, as he sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, an idea struck him. Why stop at one exhibition? If Emily's story could resonate with so many people, why not create a platform where others could share their own stories of loss and healing? It wouldn't just be about art. It would be about fostering connections, reminding people that they weren't alone in their grief. Excited by the thought, Adrian reached out to Lila immediately. Over coffee at the diner, their usual spot, he pitched his vision. "What if we started something bigger?" he asked, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "A foundation dedicated to helping people cope with loss through creativity. We could host workshops, fund projects like yours, and provide resources for families navigating tough times." Lila listened intently, her expression thoughtful. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "I think Emily would love that," she said with a smile. She always believed in using art to connect with people. This feels like the next step. With renewed purpose, Adrian and Lila set to work, building what they called the Sunshine Hearts Foundation. They poured their energy into creating programs designed to help individuals channel their emotions into meaningful expressions of art. Workshops were held in community centers, schools, and even hospitals, offering participants tools to process their grief through painting, writing, music, and other forms of creative expression. Grants were awarded to aspiring artists whose work focused on themes of hope and resilience. And every initiative carried Emily's name, ensuring her spirit remained at the heart of everything they did. Word of the foundation spread quickly, drawing attention from media outlets and philanthropists alike. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand their reach beyond the local community. Soon they were hosting events across the country, bringing together people from all walks of life who had experienced loss but refused to let it define them. Each gathering reinforced the message that while pain might be universal, so too is the capacity for healing. For Adrian, running the foundation gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. No longer was he simply a wealthy businessman disconnected from the world around him. Now he was actively involved in making a difference, one person, one story, one act of kindness at a time. He traveled frequently, meeting families, listening to their struggles, and sharing his own journey of grief and redemption. Through these interactions, he discovered that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength, a way to forge deeper connections with others. Lila, meanwhile, thrived under the spotlight. Her artwork gained recognition, earning her spots in prestigious galleries and exhibitions. Yet despite her growing fame, she remained grounded, always prioritizing the mission of the foundation over personal accolades. She often spoke publicly about her friendship with Emily, encouraging others to cherish the bonds they shared with loved ones while they still had the chance. Her authenticity resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring countless people to embrace their own stories of loss and transformation. As months turned into years, Adrian and Lila became inseparable partners, not just in their work, but in life. Their relationship evolved naturally, built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to honoring Emily's memory. Though neither of them sought romance initially, it eventually blossomed organically, filling the voids in both their hearts. Together, they proved that love could emerge from even the darkest places, offering solace and companionship when it was needed most. On the 5th anniversary of Emily's passing, Adrian and Lila organized a special memorial event. Hundreds of people gathered in a park where Emily used to play as a child. Balloons shaped like hearts floated into the sky, carrying notes written by attendees expressing gratitude, love, and remembrance. At the center of the celebration stood a sculpture commissioned by the foundation, a bronze representation of two figures holding hands beneath a sun-shaped heart. Beneath it, engraved in bold letters, were the words, "Love lives on." Adrian took the stage to address the crowd, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. 5 years ago, I lost the most important person in my life, he began, pausing to collect himself. But today I stand here surrounded by proof that her light continues to shine. Through this foundation, through your stories, and through the bond I've found with Lila, Emily has shown me that love doesn't die, it transforms. It grows, evolves, and touches lives in ways we can't always predict. He glanced at Lila, who stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. None of us are alone in our grief, he continued. And none of us have to face it without hope, because as long as we remember, as long as we share our stories, and as long as we keep loving, those we've lost will always be with us, in our hearts, in our actions, and in the legacies we leave behind. When he finished speaking, applause erupted, echoing through the park. Tears flowed freely, but so did laughter and smiles. Strangers hugged, old friends reunited, and children played nearby, oblivious to the weight of the moment yet embodying its essence perfectly. It was a day of unity, reflection, and celebration, a testament to the enduring power of love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Adrian felt a profound sense of peace. He looked at Lila, then at the crowd, and finally at the sculpture standing tall against the evening sky. In that moment, he knew Emily would be proud, not just of what they'd accomplished, but of the lives they'd touched along the way. Life hadn't turned out the way Adrian expected. Losing Emily had shattered him, leaving scars that would never fully fade. But through the pain, he had found unexpected gifts, a second chance at connection, a renewed sense time, and a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is always room for love, growth, and hope. And as fireworks lit up the night sky, symbolizing the brilliance of a life cut short but never forgotten, Adrian whispered softly to himself, "Thank you, Emily, for everything."